Hi, I'm the God damn it. Hi, I'm the Warrior Witch and you can call me Nike. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a longer one and it's going to include a decent number of visuals, so I have a lot of notes on my little tablet here, so if you see me looking down, I'm just making sure that I've got all of my information arranged. So, today's topic is going to be the basics of tarot, but not how to read specific cards. Like, I'm not going to be going over meanings, I'm going to be going over tarot as a whole. Like, how to read, where it comes from, some exercises you can do to learn yourself, lots of stuff. So let's get into it, because it's probably going to be a longer one. First point we should cover is where does it come from, because I think origins and the history have a lot to do with how we see it now. So tarot, we don't have an exact origin for it. We don't have like it was invented at this day by this person. There's a lot of possibilities of where it came from, and there's a lot of influences on its origins, but the generally accepted idea is that it comes from an Italian playing card game from around the 14 or 1500s, somewhere in that area, and later became adapted to become a divinatory tool. A lot of different people had a lot of different systems that they used, and it included regular playing cards like we know today, which is also used in the hoodoo and voodoo communities, but the one we're going to be talking more specifically about is going to be the deck that is called the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. If you've ever seen tarot cards, it's probably the one that you're most familiar with, or at least the base imagery, because many decks base their imagery off of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Looks a little something like this. And it was created by two people who were originally part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and that would be Arthur Edward Waite and Pamela Colman Smith. And I'll put their names on the screen here. So Arthur Edward Waite was the guy who sort of arranged all the ideas together, and Pamela Colman Smith was the artist, and she was an integral part of tarot becoming mainstream, and the art is now known worldwide. Even if you don't know her name, you know her artwork. So because they were both part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, a lot of Hermetic imagery is going to be part of the imagery that is in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck imagery. So if you want to learn more about that, I'm not going to go over any of that imagery here, but it is a good topic to look into, Hermetic imagery, and it really ties a lot of different parts of the occult and witchcraft together, because we might think of it as more of a witchcraft thing, but the reality of it is that it has Hermetic and occult specific imagery associated with it and origins. There's also other decks that have similar but slightly different systems, like the Thoth deck, but I'm mainly going to be talking about the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery because it's going to be the one that I am most familiar with, but just know that the Thoth deck is going to have different imagery and different symbolism that it is based on. So just keep that in mind if you're looking out there for different decks. So what is tarot? If you're very new to witchcraft and you've just heard the term, or maybe you're just stumbling upon this video, I would hope that you know other things about magic in general first, but you know, here we are. Tarot is a divinatory system using cards, and it's very similar to using runes or bone throwing or casting lots. It is a way to predict the future, but it's also used for a lot of other stuff, like getting advice or getting an outside look on a situation. Tarot is also what I call a fixed system, so every card has a meaning, and that meaning will never change no matter what you are reading about. So if it's about love, or if it's about finances, the meaning of a card is always going to remain the same. Now, where people get confused is that they get told that you have to use your intuition in order to read, which is true, but as it is a fixed system, the card's meaning won't change. It's more about how you interpret that meaning to apply to the current situation. So let's go with the Five of Cups. So in the Five of Cups, we have 5 cups, obviously, that are all sitting here. We're gonna have to break down some of this imagery, so I'm gonna be cutting away to another shot of this where we get a little bit closer. But in the Five of Cups, we have 5 cups, a bridge, a castle in distance, a river, and the man. So there's a lot of specific imagery in here, and I won't be able to get to all of it, but just a couple of notable points that I like to point out. So we have the man here in the center, staring down at 3 cups that are overturned. 2 of them have red liquid, 1 of them has green liquid. We're meant to interpret this as the red liquid being wine and the green liquid being poison. This card is all about disappointment, but he's disappointed about, yes, good things being spilled out, but also some of the things that you're mourning and some of the things that you have lost were bad for you. So sometimes losing things isn't always an entirely bad thing. If he turns around, he'll see that he still has 2 more cups that we assume are full, and if he just wanders right over here, it's not even all that far, this bridge in the background will lead him to this beautiful castle that we assume is bountiful. It's got trees and greenery all over it, which is different from the yellow background that we see here. So if he stops focusing on the disappointment, he can turn around, gather what he still has, which is plenty of abundance, 2 cups for 2 hands. He can walk over that bridge and go to that beautiful castle. So sometimes tarot is about giving us perspective, and so if we pull this 5 of Cups, we might be getting told, you need to stop focusing on that which you have lost and focus on that which you still have and that which you can go to for safety. So if you pull the 5 of Cups and you're listening to your intuition, what I mean by it being a fixed system and having to use your intuition is that you might have to focus on what the disappointment is. It's not that the 5 of Cups is suddenly going to mean the same thing as the Emperor or the Hermit. It might have similar things that you can draw depending on the other cards that are surrounding it, but the card on its own doesn't lose its meaning. If you pull the 3 of Swords, which is 3 swords stabbing into a heart, it's not going to suddenly mean your life is going to be great and you'll find a new lover soon just because there's a heart in the middle of it. It means heartbreak, it means loss, it means disappointment. That meaning isn't going to change. And if they tell you the opposite in your reading, that reader doesn't seem to know the meanings very well. Now, if you want to go with something that is a lot more intuitive, you want to go with oracle cards and oracle decks. So oracle decks are quite different because tarot is always going to be the same thing, the tower is always going to be the tower, but oracle decks are all different. Every single deck has different cards, different numbers of cards, different meanings, certainly different artwork. Every single one is going to be different, and it's a much more intuitively based system. So if you want something that is fully intuitive, go that direction. And a lot of people will mix them too. Often, readers will pull out a tarot deck and do your main reading that way, but they may also pull oracle cards from an accompanying deck that might suit their needs at that time for that reading or for you if you've picked it out, and they might also pull cards from that. But oracle decks are a separate thing from tarot, just so you know. So maybe you've just bought your first deck and you want to know what now. There's a lot of different things that you can do or not do, and these are all completely optional. I like to do some of them, I don't like to do all of them. It's all up to personal preference. So step 1, a lot of people like to get to know their decks. This is absolutely not necessary. You can totally just start reading right away as soon as you rip open the packaging, but some people like to get to know them. They like to set them on their altar to take in some of their energy. They might sleep with it on the bed next to them, like on the pillow, a little bit away so they don't roll onto it and damage it at all. Just having it in your room in general might be good. You might carry it in your purse or your backpack for a little while. Keeping it around you and getting it accustomed to your energy can be a great help. Some people will also perform what they call an interview spread. So this is where you have specific cards meaning specific things, and as you pull into those placements, those meanings match to those cards. So if one of the questions is, what will our relationship look like going forward? And you pull something like the 2 of Cups, it could be a very good sign. Or if you pull the Tower, this is where you gotta start using your intuition. It could mean that this deck will be difficult for you to read with, or it could mean that this is the deck that you should go to when you need somebody to be a little bit more forthright or when things are a little bit harder. Which leads me into, why do some people own so many decks? This also has a lot of reasons behind it. The main ones I usually see are just, I like all the decks, or, especially if they're professional readers, it can be that they use that deck for different things. So like we were mentioning before, if you pull the Tower for what your relationship is going to be like, if you're having a hard time, you reach for your hard time deck. If you're doing a love reading, you do it for the love reading. And so some people have different decks that are for different uses, but if you're a reader, it can also be that you can offer all of these deck options to the person that is getting the reading from you so that they have a deck that they can connect with. Didn't get them. If you're a professional reader, you can offer these different decks to the person you're doing the reading for so that the art is a further connection to the reading for them. Because everybody's gonna have artwork that they vibe with differently. I have certain decks that I like and certain decks that I don't like, and I know plenty of my friends adore decks that I just don't like the art for all that much, and it's just a personal preference based on the aesthetics that I happen to like. So I mentioned spreads before, so let's back up. Do you have to use spreads? Because when you start looking into tarot online, you're gonna see a lot of stuff about different spreads, different things that you can use spreads for, different spreads to do for the new moon and the full moon and the Sabbats. But you don't have to do spreads. And in fact, I don't. I actually prefer to read, so when I say that I read intuitively, this is more of what I mean. I do intuitive spreads, or at least I call them that. So spreads are usually set meanings for set positions. The most common ones you're going to see are going to be past, present, future. And so it's the card on, I hope this is right, I'm doing this backwards. The card on the left side is going to be the card indicating the past. The card in the middle is the card indicating right now or present circumstances. And the card on the right side is going to be the future. So what is coming or what to expect or where you are going. I do pull 3 cards, but I don't really do them as a past, present, future thing. It is just all things that are relating to this manner. And it can be if a certain card comes out in a certain position, that's where I lay it down. Maybe those cards are specifically connected, or if they fall out in a specific position, I'll read them together that way. But really, it's just if I pull these 3 cards, I'm going to see how they all relate together. Now, spreads can feel like kind of a lot to jump into because it goes from just one card needing to be understood to as many as you pull need to be understood, and that can get really complicated. So one spread I see a lot of beginners trying to jump into is called the Celtic Cross, which is 10 cards, and that's a lot. It's not just 10 cards that you have to know the position and the meaning for, but you also have to have all 10 of those cards coming together for one broader, more general message. And that's a lot, especially if you're new. It's hard just to know one card's meaning and how that's applying to the situation, but to apply 10, not just to the situation, but also to each other in every single combination that those will go in, it's so hard. It's a lot of information to take in, and I don't like doing big spreads like that a lot of the time, just because it's so much, and oftentimes it's unnecessary. You can get away with a 1 to 3 or maybe a 5 card spread pretty much most of the time. I would argue most of the time it doesn't need to be so complicated. You can pull more if you like and if you're comfortable doing that, but for beginners, I don't really recommend going with these big spreads. 1 to 3 will be just fine starting out. So when it comes to buying these different decks, a lot of decks have Rider-Waite-Smith base imagery. It's going to be very, very heavily influenced by that without it being directly like every single bit redrawn. And some decks aren't going to be entirely based on that. There may be hints to help draw you back to it, but you know, it's really going to depend. And I would say any deck that is heavily Rider-Waite-Smith based is going to be a good starter deck. And anything that is not, I would maybe push off until you know your card meanings a lot better. And I actually have some great examples of this. So I own 3 decks myself. That's all that I read with. It's all that I feel necessary, and it's all that I can afford, but that's another story. So I have the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the Modern Witch Tarot, and the Line Strider Tarot. So the Modern Witch deck is heavily Rider-Waite-Smith influenced, and the Line Strider deck is not. The Line Strider deck was my first deck, and I found it incredibly difficult to read with because I didn't know any of the symbolism yet. So I bought the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and then later on, once I was comfortable, I was able to think more seriously about what kinds of decks I wanted to look at in the future and bought the Modern Witch Tarot. And these are a great example of the similarities and differences that some of these cards are going to have. So I'm going to show you all the same card for each deck. So I'm going to pull up the Tower. In the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the Tower looks like this. The imagery is going to be pretty familiar to most people. It's a tower, there's people falling out, there's fire, and there's lightning striking it. It's a whole thing. Now, this is an example where the Line Strider deck does have that familiar imagery, and much more obviously, the Modern Witch Tarot also very, very much draws from that influence. And especially when you hold them up side by side, you can very much tell that that Rider-Waite-Smith imagery is definitely there. And if you compare the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery to the Line Strider imagery, you can see that it's very, very similar, but you know, it's missing a lot of the elements. There's no dark sky, there's no clouds, so it's already starting to diverge a little bit. Now let's compare the Death card. So we already know that the Modern Witch Tarot is going to be very, very similar, so I'm not going to show that, but I'm going to show Line Strider and show just how different they can be. So we have the regular Death card from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and we've got the Death card from the Line Strider Tarot. Right next to each other, you can see exactly how different these are. The Line Strider Tarot doesn't have that horse, it doesn't have the people on the ground, it doesn't have the sun in the background. It is entirely different from any of the imagery that you can use in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck to understand the meaning. Everything in the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery is going to point you back towards that meaning and give you deeper symbolism, but if you have a deck that doesn't have those same keys, you're not going to be able to pick up on those symbols without some help. So it really does help to have, in my opinion, a Rider-Waite-Smith based deck to start with and to learn the imagery of, so that you lock those meanings in and you lock in that symbolism to pull from. And then if you have one of these, you don't have to worry so much because you don't necessarily need the symbolism to draw upon, you just know the Death card, this is what it means, and these are the symbols that are often involved. And so without pointing to those symbols, you can still bring up those themes. Now, even if the decks are incredibly similar, like the Modern Witch and the Rider-Waite-Smith decks are, there's still going to be minor differences. For example, in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, there are these flowers off to the side. I believe there's irises, but in the Modern Witch, it's sunflowers. And so if the iris had specific meaning within the card or for you, it changes in this one because now it's no longer an iris, it's a sunflower. So you just have to be aware that very, very, very specific symbols are still subject to change. So I still recommend learning with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck and picking up on those symbolisms before moving on to anything else. It's not the worst thing in the world if the Modern Witch Tarot, for example, happened to be your first deck. It's really not bad. Just make sure that when you're looking it up, you're looking at the original Rider-Waite-Smith imagery and trying to apply it to this card. Some of it's not going to be exactly the same, so minor symbols may differ. Just make sure that you're being diligent in your studies. Now let's talk about good cards and bad cards. So we already talked about the Tower, which is usually at a very, very base level considered to be bad. And there's other cards like Temperance or the World or the Lovers, which are generally considered to be good, but I don't really believe in that dichotomy because every card can indicate something good or bad depending on the perspective that you take with it. So for example, I don't really view the Tower as a bad card. I actually rather like it because the Tower is all about destruction and chaos and the shattering of foundations and everything sort of falling apart and having to start all over again and start anew. But I don't always view that as a bad thing. It could be like getting out of a toxic relationship. You might not want it to end while you're in it and everything comes crumbling down around you and you feel like your whole life is over. But once you're out of it and you're past it, you realize that you had to shatter everything that you had. You had to tear down every single part of that relationship in order to get out and start fresh and begin the healing process. So I don't view the Tower as bad. I view it like getting out of a toxic relationship. It's gonna hurt. Every branch is gonna hit you on the way down, most likely, but every branch is a lesson. Meanwhile, good cards like Temperance. I don't like Temperance. I don't like when I get Temperance. In part, Temperance means patience. I don't have a lot of patience. And I know that when I pull Temperance, it usually means that it's telling me I need to have patience because it's going to be a frustrating day or the situation is going to be frustrating, so I need to be able to just give it some time. But it's frustrating the whole time that I'm giving it time because I want it to be fixed right now. I want it to be just done and over with. I want the situation to be taken care of. I don't want to have to be patient and wait for it. I want it taken care of. So a generally considered good card for me is not a bad sign, but a sign that I have to watch out for frustrations and that it's good to know that it's coming, but at the same time, I know it's going to be a frustrating time. So in general, don't be afraid if you get any sort of card, good or bad, whatever your impressions are of it. Don't be afraid if you see those cards coming up in your reading. Just take a breath and try to look at the whole situation and just take notes. Now, I mentioned before that when it comes to getting Temperance, for example, if I know that it's going to be a frustrating day ahead, I also won't recommend reading to start your day or before a situation. I would actually recommend it at the end of your day or afterwards to look back and reflect. Because, so if I pulled Temperance, for example, before I start my day, I might already be on edge and be on alert and be ready to be frustrated, and things might frustrate me a little bit faster because I'm already thinking of that theme of you have to be patient, so things are going to be frustrating. So I get it in my head and I color my whole day. Or if I get the Tower, I'm expecting everything to fall apart at any moment, and that can make me more agitated, that can make me more careless on accident, just because I have the idea in my head that everything's going to go bad. So subconsciously, part of your brain sort of lets it go bad because it's expecting that. Meanwhile, at the end of the day, you can reflect on what happened today and read the cards and see how they relate as an exercise, or you can take a broader look at the situation and see if the Tower comes up, you can say, yep, that's indicating this part of the situation, and then look at your advice cards of where to go forward. Or if the Tower is your advice, it can advise you that maybe you have to tear down and start fresh. It's all about the context of your reading. So, if you want to get started learning tarot, what's the advice I'm going to give you? Obviously, learning every card is going to be really important, but there's 78 cards in a tarot deck. It's kind of a lot to start with, so take it slow. I recommend daily readings if you can, or at least weekly. Try to do these pulls at the end of your day or the end of your week to look back, or at themes to look at moving forward to keep in mind, I'll do that one. If I'm starting my day, it's what energy can I reflect on as my day goes along. And so instead of it being what can I expect, it's more of what are some themes I can think about, and I can think about what it means to be patient. I can think about what it means to start fresh and start anew, depending on the card that I pull. So if you want to look at what to think on versus what to expect, if starting the day works better for you, go with that one. I also did a thing that I don't know if I've seen other people do this, and I don't know if everyone's going to agree with me, but it worked for me, so I don't care. One thing that I would do is I would do what I call practice spreads and practice readings. So I wouldn't be reading for myself and I wouldn't be reading for anybody else. I would just say, okay, let's say I'm doing a love reading, and so I would just pull 3 random cards and shuffle, or I might just like pick randomly. There's different ways to shuffle and pick, so it's all gonna be up to personal preference. But I would pick these 3 random cards and say, these are a love reading. And so I would see how I might read them in a love reading, and then I might change it. Same 3 cards. I would say, okay, what if this was about someone starting a business? So I would read it in terms of if it were for a business, and I would see how those meanings might change and how I might differently apply them to a situation, and how that would still tie in, how that imagery still works together between those cards. And I would do that a couple of times. If you're doing this, I highly recommend getting a journal of some sort. It can be digital, it can be physical, whatever works best for you, but it's good to reference back to those things, especially as you're learning. So when I was moving earlier this year, and I've been reading for a couple of years now, but this was still kind of a surprise to me, and so it's good to understand the context of how your deck applies to you. But I was moving, and I pulled the Knight of Swords and Temperance. And I was like, okay, maybe things are moving along quickly, but I gotta just be patient because moving is always stressful. No, the reality was our move date got moved up super fast, and it became literally the next day after that reading. And then after that point, we couldn't fully move in for like 2 more weeks. So it was very much Knight of Swords and Temperance, one right after the other. Everything's gonna move quickly, and then you're gonna have to be patient. And it was interesting looking back about a week later and seeing, oh, that's what that meant. Interesting. So taking notes really helps, and especially if you take notes of what your thoughts are in the moment, and then you revisit it later and reflect on how it did apply. That can be a great way of seeing one of the meanings or some of the ways that it can manifest depending on what you draw. I also highly recommend a couple of different types of resources. So one thing that I made myself that really helped was a spreadsheet. So this was a digital thing. I would think that would be obvious. Are spreadsheets physical? I made a digital spreadsheet, doesn't matter. And I put down all of the card meanings upright and reversed, and I was able to reference that anytime I needed, just offhand from all the different sources that I had looked at. And a lot of different sources are going to be out there. I mainly will recommend you books. I like books as a physical reference thing, especially because you already have the cards, so it's kind of nice to be able to have the cards in front of you and then flip open that book. So I really like Holistic Tarot, which I've shown a couple times on my various social media feeds, and 78 Degrees of Tarot. I think they're excellent books. They're really wonderful for beginners. And something that'll be coming out in May. Oh, I'm so excited for it. This isn't like sponsored or anything, I just adore her and her work. So Robin from A Tired Witch, I'm gonna link her below as well, but she's an excellent tarot card reader. She's coming out with a book in May, which may seem like it's kind of far away, but this gives you plenty of time. I think pre-orders are now open. I'll link the pre-order link below if it's available already. I think it is. Eee! But it's going to be a great book for anybody who's interested in tarot, and I highly recommend pre-ordering it because it is going to be so worth it. I know that Robin's an excellent reader, and she'll give excellent advice within her book. And other than that, it just comes down to practice. The only way that you can learn such a complicated, nuanced system with so many cards and so many meanings behind them is just to practice and to study. You can read these books. You could even use your cards as flashcards, so you could just run through your entire deck and see if you know all the meanings or not. Set aside the ones you don't, set aside the ones you do, whichever system of flashcards works for you. I think that's an excellent way to help yourself learn as well. So remember that it just is going to take time and practice. Don't stress about trying to learn every single symbol immediately because, oh Lord, that's so much. Try to stick with one card at a time. Say, okay, these are all the meanings and these are all the symbols. How do all the symbols tie into the meanings? Just take it slow because, you know, there's a lot to it. But, you know, like with anything in witchcraft, you have your whole life to learn. So, if you want to interact with me on Instagram or interact with the community, I actually have a hashtag. It's called Warrior Witch Coven. And if you want to interact with me on my social media, it's Warrior Witch Nike everywhere except Twitter, where it's Warrior Witch N, because the naming convention is too long. And if you want to check out more of my beautiful voice, I host a podcast called Occultism with a Side of Salt. And it's me and my beautiful, wonderful co-host Georgina, and we talk about all sorts of different topics every week. So links for that will also be below, and I'll see you guys next time. So, blessed be.